And now we'll move to the part about communication. I mean, getting to a wider audience where Joachim and Diane from TNE will take us away on some of the recent work that you have been doing. Also, great work. So, please.
Great. Well, we are the lucky slot of the last of the panel of the day, and well done to Paul and Matteo. That was an impressive presentation. So I'm Diane. I'm currently the Interim Aviation Director at TNE, and here with Joachim from Blue Lines. We're rounding up day one. But I'd like, before we start, we should give a round of applause to all the organizers of this conference. It was an excellent day one, and we look forward to day two. So we're here to talk about the climate opportunity that nobody talks about and the challenge of communicating on contrails. We'll be presenting three main things. So Joachim will start with the state of play, who and how are contrails communicated and talked about. Then I will go over 3 years of campaigning on contrails at TNE and the lessons learned, what has worked well with media, what has worked well with policymakers. And then we'd like to give you tools and concrete takeaways when you are talking to media, talking to policymaking, talking to your grandma. What tools should they use to learn about contrails? I pass over to Joachim.
Thank you, Diane. So talking and communicating about contrails, or is it CHEMtrails? So I was talking to a journalist here earlier today, and she accidentally said CHEMtrails, and then I also started saying CHEMtrails, and it's a completely different thing. We can agree on that. So if we talk about contrails, there have been some interest from the media. I totally agree with the many times it's been mentioned. If we walk out around the lakes and we ask 100 people, what are contrails, how do they impact the climate? I doubt that very many will be able to answer. So we have these examples of media stories. So that's all good, but if you look at Google Trends, so this is a search done a few days ago on Google Trends for the search term contrails over the last 2 years. You see all these spikes. They actually correspond really nicely with big media outlets writing about contrails. So there's a Guardian article there in 23, New York Times, Washington Post, NBC News. This was about CHEMtrails, actually. We'll get back to that. And here is CNN. But when you mention CHEMtrails, you also have to mention contrails, at least if you have to explain what they really are. And you see the spike coming up here. I'm sure that's the Copenhagen Contrails Conference. So let's look at CHEMtrails then. It has a similar curve going up and down. Again, the problem is that if we put the blue line is what we saw before was contrails, and 6 to 7 times more searches are done punching in the word CHEMtrails than contrails. Again, we can see what prompted these searches. There was a big debate in the Kuwait Parliament in January of last year that made a spike. This is from Tennessee, the state of Tennessee in the US passing a law against CHEMtrails. And finally, all these last spikes for the last year all correspond to Republican lawmakers in 15 different states introducing 25 bills against CHEMtrails. So let's look at the difference between CHEMtrails and contrails. CHEMtrails are a conspiracy theory. Contrails is science. CHEMtrails created by them. Anyone you don't like, anyone you think are harming you, Bill Gates, the government, so on. Contrails are created by physics. CHEMtrails do not exist. Contrails exist and have a climate impact. CHEMtrails are a popular Google search. Contrails 85% less searched for. CHEMtrails are secret, dark, exciting, and contrails needs to be explained. How do they work? It's just much easier to make up a story. There's no proof of CHEMtrails. There's been a big Harvard study, so this is not something I say. Plenty of proof of contrails. But CHEMtrails, with all these exciting things, are, except for the no proof, they're easy to communicate. And contrails are a little harder to communicate. We spent 8 hours so far. So what do people actually know? Now we're talking about contrails. We don't have so many studies. We're all saying, let's go out and ask people, but if we really do that, not a lot of people have done that. There was a study by KPMG Ireland that was released last year in January. It's a very small, like they call it a mass study. I don't know the details of it, but this is what was publicized, that roughly 2/3 are not really familiar with contrails when asked on the street. Then they're giving a little bit more information about the climate impact and possible solutions, and now 2/3 are positive towards airline adopting some contrail mitigation measures. There was also, I was a part with contrails.org. We hired UC Berkeley Consultancy, 180 DC they're called, and conducted a survey. 317 respondents, mainly younger people, mainly from the US West Coast, around the UC Berkeley campus, mainly higher education. Only 1 of 3 knew what contrails were when they were asked. But when talked a little bit more about it, 97% of respondents reported having seen a contrail. And this is the good thing. How many people have seen a CO2? No, nobody. But we can see this problem, right? So this should work for us. And when guessing why contrails form, 83 guessed correctly. They got, chemical spraying, I don't know, natural cloud formation, but most people kind of figured it out. Again, this is higher education. And for people who knew about contrails, the 1/3 beforehand, and people who didn't know, there was a similar level of concern when they got to know a little bit more about the impact of contrails. And with that, over to you.
Thank you. Joachim now presented the challenge. It's really hard to talk about contrails, but actually I'm here to kind of give some takeaways from 3 years of campaigning and trying to convince the media to write about contrails. But before I start, I'd really like to introduce a strong caveat. This is when communicating to the media, to policymakers, to a general audience. It's not for a scientific conference. This is really the simplification or simplifying contrails. And I'm not for oversimplification, that is miscommunication, but complexifying is also miscommunication. So back to where it started. When I came to TNE, everyone was kind of scared to talk about contrails. Fair enough, it is a complicated topic. There's uncertainty, we've heard that today. It's put under this umbrella term of non-CO2, which between you and I is not necessarily a helpful term. Words like nitrogen oxides, water vapor, hydrotreatment were being floating around. And it was quite hard to find media articles at the time that explained the topic in simple words. And I was told, it's yet another problem and it's big. It seemed quite overwhelming. But then we delved deeper into it, and working with quite a lot of partners, reading scientific papers, reading some media articles, we worked on building quite a strong narrative that can be boiled down in 2-3 minutes, exactly like the Deutsche Welle does here. We launched a video last year that managed to do it in 2-3 minutes. So when you boil it down, there's actually no fear and no scared. You shouldn't be scared of talking about it. It is possible to boil it down. So what are the main points that should come across? First, it's a visible problem. We're talking about white lines in the sky, and I think it's been mentioned a lot today. It's not often that you have a visible problem that you can talk about. Are they bad? Yes, they're at least as bad as CO2. So we can use terms like gigatons of CO2 equivalent, megatons, but between you and I can relate to something that's roughly 100 kilos or less, because that's close to human weight, but anything above is completely intangible. So I find that actually just using, it's at least as bad as CO2, is sometimes quite helpful. No need to use these big, impressive numbers. How do they form? So that's when it gets a bit more complicated, but actually it can be done quite quickly. If you set the scene, it's certain atmospheric conditions, very cold and very humid regions. Then this magic equation of particles released by the engine plus water to form ice crystals. A metaphor that works quite well is it's like breathing out on a cold winter morning. Then it's the most techie part. They can be cooling or warming. Wait, what? They can be both cooling and warming? That seems quite complicated. But we started introducing a metaphor that works quite well. It's a combination of both parasol and a blanket. Hear me out. So during the day, contrails can be likened to a combination. Contrails function like a parasol, reflecting the radiation of the sun back into space, helping to cool the planet. But at the same time, they act like a blanket, trapping heat emitted by the Earth and preventing it to escape back into space. That contributes to warming. At night, however, the parasol effect becomes irrelevant. So we only have the blanket effect, contributing to the Earth's warming. So you've explained the science. Whew. Hopefully you haven't lost them. Then what can you do? Well, first, it's quite a targeted problem. So as we all know, it's 3% or somewhat a small percentage of flights that cause 80% of the problem. So what do you do about those 3% of flights? You adjust the flight path. Yes, there's this CO2 penalty that we've all heard about, but you may burn more jet fuel, but the climate benefits of avoiding contrails massively outweigh the CO2 penalty. And then the fun part, the last one, how much does it cost? And we've heard it over and over again today. It's less than a tenner per flight ticket. So these are kind of the 5 building blocks in a narrative that you can use with media, with policymakers, to your family. What do you see? Are they bad for the planet? How do they form? What can we do? And how much does it cost? It's no surprise that metaphors work quite well. I'm a communicator, I use them a lot. In the last century, scientists working on CFCs managed to raise awareness by talking about the ozone hole. Nobody wants an ozone hole. That creates a symbol of fear. We haven't got that yet for contrails. And so this is a call to all. I myself am working on this. Can we create an ozone hole metaphor for contrails to raise the urgent problem? In the meantime, I've done some work with ChatGPT. I talked about a blanket of contrails, a cobweb of contrails, or a suffering planet warmed by contrails. Then my team asked me to hand over the work to a comms agency. And we worked with something a bit more scientific. We like using the metaphor of the hidden side of the iceberg, aviation's total climate impact. And a recent one that worked us quite well is that contrails have an earth-shattering impact on our planet. Then a second takeaway, focusing on the positive. This was mentioned earlier by Anna. And I'd like to bring in an anecdote. When I worked with last year pitching our contrails study to the BBC, I was talking to the journalist and he was like, "Oh, Diane, it's so nice to be writing about a positive story for once." And then he also told me, "My editor's mother-in-law believes in the CHEMtrails conspiracy, so she's bound to like the story." But then I did a bit of research I just typed contrails and climate. And these are some of the headlines that appeared. Good for the environment, help the climate, cheap fix, solve, solution, easy climate win, clever way. So really, it's being framed as a positive thing for the climate. And I think we should continue tapping into this. Raise the awareness, but quickly go into the positives. And then the last one, the uncertainty. And I'm sorry, I have to talk about it again. We're looking at this very helpful graph. It's very clear, and this is from, sorry, I should source it. It's from the Cambridge Aviation Impact Accelerator. It's quite clear that the climate impact of contrails carries a high degree of uncertainty. we're talking about plus or minus 70%. But what is clear is that despite the uncertainties, contrails have a net warming climate impact. The uncertainty bar is and remains above zero for ERF, effective radiative forcing. So the problem among media, policymakers, is that the uncertainty is focusing on the wrong thing. So what I like to reframe to is, it is certain that contrails are warming. The question is by how much? So yes, more research is needed to minimize the uncertainty band, but the fact that we know it's warming means that action is therefore beneficial. And a few weeks ago, we were in London and Stephen Barrett pointed out that worst case, we burn 1% more jet fuel to solve the problem. Best case, we reduce global warming by 2%. Now, this eternal question, and this is an open question, I'm not trying to provide an answer, but should we be tapping more into the chemtrails conspiracy to give more visibility to contrails? Now, until now at TNE, and I'm sure many of you, we've shied away from approaching this word, this very scary word, and I wanted to test it to finally put numbers behind it. So we launched a new page on Friday that I'm going to talk about in a bit, and I asked my comms colleagues to test with 2 headlines, one that contains the words chemtrails and one that doesn't. I have to be honest, I was expecting the one with the chemtrails to generate more clicks. That's actually not what happened. So this is not in any way a scientific experiment. It was tested on roughly 1,000 people, most of them European, because that's where our audience mostly is. So I don't think the same results may be in the US. But actually, what it does show is that maybe we should just be sticking to contrails to get more attention. To sum up, a few of the lessons learned. Don't be scared to communicate about contrails. It is possible to do it in 2 minutes. Make it visible and use metaphors. Focus on the positive, it has worked. And lastly, we can reframe the uncertainty. Now, our last part. We wanted to kind of give you a few tips and tools that you can use if you are referencing contrails, where should you look? Excuse the bit of self-promotion from our 2 organizations, but we do refer to others. Yes. We launched last Friday this kind of contrails for dummy pages. They do refer and are sourced by lots of very, very good reports, the RMI report, Google imaging. But what we really wanted to do is explain contrails in 1 page. It is still quite long, but try and explain contrails for dummies. It also has some parts on other non-CO2 emissions.
Thank you. And I'm also thinking that we should, when we put this video up, we could make one communicating about chemtrails and one named communicating about contrails and see which one gets the most clicks on YouTube. The next tool here is from contrails.org and their map. And I think tomorrow we are going to have a little screen outside so you can try it. But you can click on any trajectory here. Here's Azerbaijan Airlines. You can follow it. You can see the projected contrail zones it goes through. You can also search. This is my flight that I came from San Francisco to here. And sadly, it created moderate warming contrails, which is equivalent to the CO2 of that flight. Mostly, over Scandinavia in the end. So I think there's a 24-hour lagging period, but I highly encourage you to go and play with this tool. It's really nice. Am I the next one? You're the next one.
Then if you want to better understand the contrail impact per airline, this is where we refer to others, Istria has published the Contrail Opportunity Index, where you can see it's a ranking at the moment of the contrail impact of certain airlines and the ones that, let's say, I won't say pollute, but that release or cause the most contrails on their flights. And last but not least.
Yeah, then Blue Lines, my organization, we simply just track which airlines have publicly spoken about their contrail efforts and try to turn them into a nice frequent flyer, platinum, gold, silver, bronze tiers. So bronze is simply acknowledging the climate impact of contrails, and it's really important to state here that out of the thousands of airlines in the world, only 35 have ever talked about contrails. And if you know of any public resources of airlines who are not here, please let me know, because it's been a long time since we added to the index. So these are the airlines in the bronze category, just mentioning it. Then the next one is just participating in trials and or collaborating with scientists and having, of course, communicated about it. Gold is more at scale, doing larger scale trials. We'll find the airlines that we'll find TUI in here. DHL have to move up to very soon when they publish more about their work. And then finally, platinum is if you, as an airline, have a target, which Delta communicated 3 years ago, saying that they want to reduce contrail warming by 80% in 2030, I think it is, or 2035, and by 100% by 2050. We also just want to show here that we have different ways of showing that it's cargo airlines, it's low-cost airlines, it's full-scale airlines. It's mostly European and North American airlines, which is also where the problem is the greatest. And finally, we have all the links so you can read up on all this activity yourself. That's about it. And questions for 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Celeste from Aviation Environment Federation. My question is a bit slightly moving on from this. It's just the confusion around this. I just wonder whether there might be a time in the future where airlines take advantage of the confusion and talk about climate impact of flying, and lumping non-CO2 and CO2 in together, and saying, oh, we've done all this stuff about contrails, and somehow there's, you know, the difference between the two things that no one really understands becomes like, by definition, they've done something on climate when they haven't done anything about the CO2. So I'm just wondering, are you thinking about that, Diane?
I think we always need to be really clear that these efforts come on top of CO2, but what's good with this one is you can talk about the short-term mitigation, and indeed, it's much more of a headache to sort out CO2 than it is to sort out non-CO2. But if you say that this comes on top, this is a short-term climate win, whilst they're still working out the CO2 headache, it's very clear. But indeed, lumping them together, but at the moment they're not lumping them at all. At the moment, it's a problem that's not talked about enough, and should be. So I think, in the next 3 years, we need to talk about the problem more, find solutions, act on them, and then, whilst we're still figuring out the CO2 problem.
I just want to add on that Air France actually have a website. You have to dig a little bit, explaining contrails and how Air France are actually responsible for some contrails and are working to mitigate them, and they are.
Hey, so I was wondering, with your tracker leaderboard of airlines, was there any that you went to that didn't have it, and you've sort of engaged with them, and then they've said, oh yeah, you've made a good point, we'll work with you and we'll add it to the website? And yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it, obviously we know a lot of people that are in different companies. We're quite keen for people that work in different airlines to go to their employer and say, hey, why don't you do this? Is there kind of a best practice that you've got? And then just the final part is to kind of go a step further than platinum. Would there be like actually contributing positively to the policy discussions, for example, like saying it should be included in extra ETS, or the country where we operate should include it in their NDCs, or just like some sort of like thing where they can go even further than your platinum status?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very flattered that you even think that airlines would be affected by this. Maybe they are, but they're not telling me. I think it's a very good idea to ask airline employees to go to their management and say, hey, why don't you acknowledge the contrails at least? Why don't you maybe get involved in trials? And I would love to work together with Safe Landing on that. And what was the third question again? It was a new category. I think those categories have to evolve for sure over time. The sad news is actually that, in my opinion, I think because of all these greenwashing claims and court cases, that airlines have stopped communicating about this very much. I mean, new airlines. So we haven't added an airline in almost a year, actually. And before that, it went really fast with new airlines, communicating about contrails, being proud of their results, releasing them with scientists. And so it's a little bit of a sad development right now.
But I'd also like to welcome, and at TNE and a lot of us work very closely with a lot of industry stakeholders who are building technologies, who want to make this work, who are active in policy discussions. So I think we can also welcome the efforts by a lot of industry stakeholders, ANSPs, airlines, industry players on this. So it's not all it's really not at all a negative overall picture.
And with these words, I think we should conclude for today.